The British Poetry Revival is the general name given to a rather loose poetry movement in Britain that took place in the 60s and 70s. Often, the revival is described as a modernist-inspired reaction to the movement's more conservative approach to British poetry. If movement poets look to Thomas Hardy as a model for poetic style, the poets of the British Poetry Revival likely look to modernist models such as American poets Ezra Pound and William Carlos Williams, and British figures such as Basil Bunting, Hugh MacDiarmid, and David Jones. Such revival poets include Roy Fisher, Gail Turnbull, Ian Hamilton Finlay, Bob Cobbing, and Peter Finch. Many revival poets joined the nearly dormant Poetry Society in 1971 and became the Poetry Society's new council. Under the new council, the society shifted its perspective of modernists to a more favorable realm. Eric Mottram was made editor of the Poetry Review, the society's magazine, and edited 20 issues over 6 years that featured primarily the key revival poets. The 60s and 70s were also a time of increasing popularity among British musicians. The British invasion ushered in many UK-based chart toppers in the US and led to the most prolific period of many artists' careers. Groups such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Zombies, and the Hollies gained fame and popularity during this time. Not inconsistent with much of modern history, the art of music, specifically rock and roll, garnered more attention than the art of poetry at the time. Seemingly, the question of why this is the case is rarely posed. People generally take for granted the fact that rock stars are ultimately more attention-worthy than their poetic counterparts. This disparity in popularity could have any number of causes. Of course, both art forms have their strong suits, but one often lends itself to more publicity and has more funding for promotional stints and exposure. Despite the upper hand many British invasion groups had in terms of finances, the question of whether or not finances alone propel musicians ahead of poets in the public eye is still up for debate. Why, if lyricists and poets often play a similar game in crafting their respective works, do musicians frequently appreciate a greater reception than poets? Does the addition of instrumentals and melody really add that much to a piece? Are the verses in songs more likely to resonate with people than the verses in poetry? Is music simply more readily digestible? One way to compare the two, and the ways that they can be compared, is by stripping them both to their words alone. No sung lyrics nor spoken word, just plain text. The Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand, released on February of 1964, struck gold on the UK singles chart and maintained number 1 for 7 weeks.
I'll tell you something, I think you'll understand when I say that something. I want to hold your hand.
No British poetry of the 60s or 70s garnered comparable attention from the public. One of the more popular English poets of the time was experiencing a steep decline in public favor after ex-wife Sylvia Plath's suicide. Ted Hughes published numerous works in his lifetime but became far less prolific after Plath's death. Hughes' poem Love Song and I Want to Hold Your Hand shared common themes but were executed very differently. One rendered the public crazy with delight, whereas the other managed to sail under the radar, generally undetected at the time of its publication. As is the case when comparing the aforementioned works, oftentimes lyrics of popular songs will appear excessively plain and repetitive when put to paper. For instance, I Want to Hold Your Hand consists of only approximately 10 unique lines, with the others all being repeats or slightly altered variations of previous lines. The lyrics display a sort of simplicity that Hughes' Love Song does not, which could make the Beatles' piece more accessible to the general public by virtue of the fact that it doesn't rely heavily on metaphor or symbolism and thus doesn't require high levels of analysis to be understood. Love Song doesn't paint love or adoration as nearly a simplistic light. Instead, it makes note of its pitfalls and concomitant struggles. It gruesomely depicts the wreckage love can leave in its wake with lines such as, her smiles were spider bites, his glances were ghosts in the corner with horrible secrets, and her promises took the top off of his skull. Perhaps it is the unapologetic manner of description many poets employ that is found to be aversive by the majority of consumers. Everyone feels the love and light-hearted tenderness, and, oh please say to me you'll let me be your man, but it requires a great deal more effort to appreciate the kind of love Hughes reflects on, that which presents itself as spider bites and halves of lopped melons. Despite their stark differences, both art forms are clearly impressive in their own right. When it comes to the question of which is more deserving of praise overall, it simply depends on who you ask.